The wind cut sharp over Range 7 at Fort Carlisle, dragging desert dust into long, whispering eddies. Soldiers lined up by the bleachers, some talking, some laughing, a few leaning against weather-worn benches with their rifles slung loose. The afternoon sun beat down hard. It was just another training day. Until she appeared. She came from the eastern access gate, quiet and alone, her silver jacket glinting like metal in the sun. A slight woman, barely 5'3", maybe 100 pounds, with eyes like distant rain and a slow, precise walk that made no sound on the gravel. No announcement. No escort. No one noticed her at first. It wasn't until she stepped up to the firing control panel, bypassing the clipboard check-in and the waiting line of trainees, that heads turned. Private Lewis nudged Corporal Jenkins. "Who's the chick in the windbreaker?" he muttered. "She even registered?" She reached out calmly and placed her hand on the biometric scanner. The panel lit up. Then everything stopped. A chime echoed, low and artificial. Red lights blinked once, then twice. The words flashed across the control panel. Witness signature detected. Call sign, Widow Mark. Reactivation authorized. A chill spread across the range like fog rolling in off a battlefield. The instructors, grizzled men with years in the sandbox and scars no one talked about, stood frozen. Sergeant First Class Hayes, mid-step with a megaphone in his hand, went pale. Blake, the range master and a two-time Olympic rifle coach, took off his cap slowly. "My God," he breathed. "She's not supposed to be alive." A whisper ran down the line. Widow Mark. Some had heard of her, a ghost story passed down between deployments. Black Ops sniper. Vanished in 2011. Dead, they said. Off the books. The kind of legend you didn't joke about. Yet here she was. She pulled her satchel from her shoulder and set it gently on the table. Her movements were exact. Deliberate. Inside was a weapon she kept in darkness for 14 years. The kind of weapon no one touched but her. Old school. Custom grip. Steel barrel. Balanced like a thought in her hand. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't speak. She simply stepped up to the firing line and adjusted the sight. Then, as if time itself had returned, the sounds of the range came rushing back. Rifle bolts snapped open. Boots scuffed. But nobody spoke. Because one of America's greatest ghosts had just walked back onto a range. And no one saw it coming. They didn't recognize her, not really. The woman who walked across the open stretch of dirt and sun toward Lane 3 looked like a civilian. Her jacket shimmered oddly in the heat, aluminum-lined, maybe, or just old enough to catch the light wrong. Her jeans were standard, her boots scuffed, her satchel unremarkable. But nothing about her was casual. She moved like someone who hadn't just trained in combat but had survived it. Not a drill. Not a simulation. The real thing. Her body held a kind of quiet readiness, the unconscious economy of motion you only learn from years under fire. That instinct you didn't even talk about. The name on her intake badge read, Rachel Steele. 35 years old. Civilian contractor. Clearance level, low. She'd entered the base legally, registering through an obscure channel in the Civilian Training Liaison Office. No flags. No alerts. To the instructors, she was just another non-priority observer. To the soldiers lining the bleachers, especially Corporal Jenkins and Private Lewis, she was something else entirely. They watched her walk, whispering behind the curve of a smirk. "You think she's here to film a YouTube series or something?" Lewis grinned. "Looks like someone who posts rifle tips in yoga pants. She even carry a weapon? Bet she shoots like my grandma." Laughter rippled around them. Rachel didn't flinch. She just moved calmly and purposefully to where the gear was stacked. Behind her back, they kept talking. Maybe she got lost. Civilians aren't supposed to run the fire control panel. "You see her hand on that scanner? Glitched the whole thing." "What did it say, Widow something?" "Widow Mark," Blake said quietly, not looking at them. The instructors turned. Blake never interrupted. The man was a legend in his own right, 10 years Delta, 6 years coaching Olympic marksmen. He didn't say much, and when he did, people listened. "Widow Mark," he repeated, his eyes fixed on Rachel as she set her rifle down at Lane 3. "It can't be." "Is that a real call sign?" Jenkins asked, confused. "It's more than a call sign," Blake said. She was classified Tier 0 Black Asset. Deep Field Recon. Confirmed kills in 7 zones, none of them acknowledged. One of the last active shooters before the Kabul blackout. "You mean Afghanistan?" Blake nodded. When she disappeared, command said Kia. There wasn't even a funeral. Just a note sent up the chain, Widow Mark deactivated. Nobody saw her again. Private Lewis frowned. Why is she back now? Blake didn't answer. Rachel stepped into her stance. She didn't take a practice breath. Didn't adjust her gloves. Just raised the rifle and stared downrange. The wind pushed us sideways over the target's paper silhouette swaying slightly at 800 meters. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked like a bone-breaking silence. 800 meters. Dead center. Again. 6 rounds. 6 center hits. Less than 12 seconds apart. Each impact pinged like judgment, clean, irreversible. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the young soldiers stopped joking. Even Jenkins, who hadn't shut up since morning, was staring with his mouth half open. Blake stepped forward. You've still got it, he said, not quite a question. Rachel said nothing at first. She lowered the rifle slowly and set it on the rest. I wanted to see if it still worked, she said softly. Her voice was low. Weathered. Something in it scraped against the room's expectations. She turned and walked past Blake like he was part of the landscape. Instructor Hayes was already pulling up her scan on the terminal. It took half a minute to unlock. Then the screen lit with red overlays. Access level restricted. Witness signature confirmed. Widow mark reactivated. Jesus Christ, Hayes muttered. She's real. Soldiers whispered. A few shifted, suddenly unsure of the laughter they just shared. One of them, Private Lewis, stared down at his boots. He'd laughed the loudest. He hadn't realized she was the one who pulled Captain Jarvis Morrison, the general's son, from an ambush 6 years ago in Alcott. They'd lost 2 squads in that operation. Rachel was the one who'd stayed behind. Called down fire. Bought them 4 minutes. And disappeared. The same Captain Morrison whose unit now trained here. Lewis didn't know it yet, but Morrison had never told them who saved his life. He never said it was a woman. Rachel returned to the bench and opened her satchel. Inside was a cloth-wrapped bundle. She unfolded it carefully, a set of dog tags, scuffed and faded. She held them a moment, then tucked them back in. I don't want medals, she murmured. I'm not here to relive anything. Blake nodded. Then why now, he asked. Rachel looked down the range. Because I heard something. Laughter. From the unit that owes me its future. And I thought, maybe it's time they remembered where they came from. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. Rachel sat near the edge of the room, away from the rows of folding chairs and laminated safety posters. She kept her satchel close, her rifle already checked back in. A few instructors came and went, casting glances her way but saying little. Most didn't know what to make of her yet. The younger soldiers did. They stood in small circles near the vending machine, talking in the half-lowered voices of men who thought they understood strength. Corporal Jenkins leaned against the counter with a paper cup in hand, voice pitched just loud enough. I mean, yeah, anyone can get a few clean shots off. Doesn't mean she's special. Private Lewis chuckled, but the sound was strained now. 6 for 6 at 800 meters, though. Lucky wind, Jenkins muttered. She's what, 35? Probably peaked a decade ago. Another soldier joined them, Sergeant Vance, mid-20s, ambitious, eyes sharp with ambition. He gestured toward Rachel without looking. She got clearance to be here, sure, but if she's so elite, what's she doing in a range break room drinking base coffee with us? The laughter returned, cautious now. One of the trainees added under his breath, bet she's here to lecture us on mindfulness or some crap. Rachel said nothing. She sipped her drink, still and unreadable. At the far end of the room, a junior sergeant, new to the post, walked in and paused when he saw her. He smiled politely and crossed over, holding a styrofoam cup in one hand. Hey there. You lost. Rachel glanced up. No. The sergeant hesitated. I just mean, this is the trainee lounge. We get visitors sometimes, but they usually wait with the civilians during break rotations. She studied him for a moment. You suggesting I go wait outside? His face tightened. No, just some of the guys might be wondering. I can bring you a different seat. She looked away. Thanks. I'm fine here. The sergeant lingered, unsure, then gave a stiff nod and stepped back. As he returned to his peers, Rachel caught a few words. Probably someone's aunt. Definitely not Delta. She even passed the physical? Another voice, hushed and mean, Instagram model, not war hero. They laughed louder this time, emboldened by her silence. None of them saw Instructor Hayes watching from the hall. None of them knew what he'd seen on the monitor. Or what was about to change. The door creaked open. Hayes stepped in. The room quieted. He held a folder under one arm, expression unreadable. Break's over, he said evenly. Range reset in 10. Recoil training for Bravo Group. And someone needs to learn humility before we go hot again. He looked toward Rachel. You coming? She stood without a word and followed him out. Behind her, the young soldiers whispered again, but this time the sound had changed. Less mockery. More uncertainty. Hayes led her down the corridor toward the main control center. As they walked, he spoke without turning. I read your record. Rachel nodded once. I figured. You should have never been erased. I wasn't erased. I asked to be removed. Hayes stopped at a doorway and turned to her. They told us you went missing. She shrugged. Some ghosts stay gone. They entered the control center. The light was low, the monitors glowing in soft red hues. Inside, Blake sat alone with the training coordinator. When he saw Rachel, he stood slowly. We've activated the signature log, Blake said. You're confirmed. Rachel said nothing. Blake motioned to the main screen. It flagged half the base. What did command say? They haven't said anything yet. But someone's reading it. A pause. You really want to train again? Rachel stared at the screen. No. I want to be seen. She stepped forward and laid her hand against the main console once more. The scan completed in seconds. Then the system locked. Access granted. Call sign, Widow Mark. Operational status, reactivated. The screen flashed silver. Tactical overlays rippled briefly across the display. Archive footage loaded, a grainy video from a helmet cam dated June 2017. Alcut Province. Explosions. Smoke. Screaming. Rachel stood over a body covering it with her own. A voice crackled over the audio. She's still covering him. Jesus, she's not moving. Rachel turned away. The memory didn't need revisiting. Behind her, Hayes exhaled slowly. That was Morrison. She nodded. You saved his life. I gave him a few extra minutes. That's all. Hayes looked at her with something like awe. He's a full colonel now. That unit that laughed at you? He trains them. Rachel's eyes stayed distant. I know. Back outside, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the range. The trainees were already lining up again, their chatter subdued. Jenkins and Lewis stood near the front, both watching the horizon like they expected something to arrive. Rachel walked alone to lane 4. This time, no one mocked her. She set the rifle down again. The same one. Same feel. Her hands moved like memory, assembling the stance without thought. No speech. No challenge. Just presence. 5 shots, she said quietly, adjusting the sight. No assist. 850 meters. Blake stepped forward and raised a hand. Witness confirmed, he called out. Stand clear. She fired. The first shot cut the air like truth. Then the second. Third. Fourth. Fifth. Each one hit with the sound of certainty, perfect shots on a swaying target in the wind. 850 meters. Unassisted. Rachel exhaled slowly. She set the weapon down and turned toward the line of young men who had doubted her, who still wore laughter like a shield. I came back, she said. Not for applause. Not for rank. For memory. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Private Lewis stepped forward. His voice barely above a whisper. You're Widow Mark. Rachel nodded once. I was. The room, the open desert air, the watching instructors, the weight of unspoken history held still. Then Blake stepped forward, voice calm but ringing clear. From now on, he said, range 7 is closed. He turned to the terminal. A few keystrokes. A single update. Range name, Widow Mark Range. The next morning, a temporary metal plaque hung beside the entrance to the range. It gleamed in the sun, nothing ornate, just black steel etched with silver letters. Widow Mark Range. EST July 10th Fort Carlisle Training Command. Most of the younger soldiers didn't say much when they walked past it. They straightened almost instinctively. The instructors noticed, but no one commented. Private Lewis was already there when the sun came up. He stood in front of the plaque for almost 15 minutes, his coffee untouched in his hand. When Jenkins joined him, there was no smirk on his face. She's the reason Morrison's alive, Lewis said. Jenkins didn't respond right away. Blake told me she held the line with a busted leg. Ordered her evac canceled to keep covering the flank. Lewis nodded. She stayed. Alone. That day Morrison's unit had lost contact for 23 minutes. When comms came back, the evac chopper reported 1 body on the field, covering 4 others with her own gear stacked as a barrier. They thought she was dead. And for 14 years, that's what the file said, presumed Kia. Case closed. Until yesterday. Now the soldiers who once laughed at her stood differently. They hadn't been ordered to respect her. They just had to look. Inside the training building, Rachel sat quietly in the equipment bay, her satchel on her lap. The same metal tags lay in her palm. She traced the edges slowly, the silence around her thick with memory. Blake entered without knocking. He sat across from her and waited. "I called Morrison," he said. "Told him you were here." Rachel's eyes flicked up, but she said nothing. "He wants to see you." "I'm not here for reunions." Blake nodded. "He said that's what you'd say." A pause. "He also said he never stopped looking." Rachel closed her hand around the tags. "You shouldn't have." Blake leaned back in the chair. "You could have had everything. After Alcott, medals, promotion, full clearance reinstated. I didn't want any of it." He studied her for a long moment. "Why now, Rachel? You could have stayed gone." She didn't answer at first. Then finally, because I saw a photo online. Fort Carlisle's new recruits. Morrison's unit laughing on a training day. No helmets. No discipline. One of them holding a target with my initials on it. Spray painted in red. Blake's face darkened. They didn't know. They should have. She stood slowly. History's not made by shouting. It's made by sacrifice. The kind no one thanks you for. Blake looked down. They're kids. They've only seen war in headlines. And that's the problem. Outside, the sun crested fully above the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. The day's training began late. Rachel stood at the end of the range, speaking to no one. She didn't need to. Her presence alone corrected posture, tightened grips, cleared the air of distraction. At 0900, Morrison's convoy pulled into the lot. It wasn't official. No uniforms, no entourage. Just one man stepping out of a black SUV, his gait slow, his hands empty. He wore civilian clothes, gray slacks, black boots, a simple collared shirt tucked neatly, but no insignia. Morrison approached her across the length of the range, past rows of targets and scattered footprints in the dirt. Rachel didn't move. When he reached her, he paused. Neither of them spoke. Then softly, "You saved my life. I delayed your death." Morrison smiled faintly. "You were supposed to be dead." "I was." She held up the tags. "These are what I left behind." He looked at them for a moment, then took a breath. "Do you want your record corrected?" "No." "Do you want them to know who you are?" Rachel's eyes met his. "I want them to understand what they stand on." He nodded. "Then we'll start there." That afternoon, every active training unit was pulled into the central auditorium. It wasn't on the schedule. No explanation. Just an order. They filed in row by row, dust on their boots and questions in their eyes. The room buzzed with speculation. Morrison took the stage, a single mic before him. No pomp. No introduction. He looked over the gathered soldiers, new blood, restless, some slouching in their seats. He spoke one name. Widow Mark. Silence. 14 years ago in Alcott province, I led a mission that failed in every measurable way. We were ambushed. Cut off. No air support. No comms. We were 5 minutes from being erased. He gestured to the back of the room. One soldier stayed behind. Without orders. Without backup. She held the line. Alone. Heads turned. Rachel stood there, quiet and small, her hands behind her back. She was presumed dead. Her file was closed. But without her, none of us would be standing here today. The room was still. You may not know her name. You may have laughed yesterday. But every one of you trains on a range named for the ghost who saved us. A long silence. Then someone stood. Private Lewis. He stepped forward and saluted. Not the crisp salute of protocol. The kind that rises from shame. And from truth. Others followed. One by one. No command given. Just understanding. Rachel did not return the salute. She simply nodded. And turned to leave. As she passed the rows, no one said a word. She didn't need applause. She already had something rarer. Recognition. Later that week, the sun rose over Range 12 with a strange hush. Soldiers who normally arrived late came early. Instructors who usually stood off to the side now walked the line in quiet deference. Something had shifted. It wasn't fear. It wasn't command. It was presence. The new plaque had been polished, mounted in permanent steel, its name already burned into the daybooks and firing logs. Widow Mark Range. Recruits no longer joked about the name. They fell into line faster. adjusted their sights more carefully. They knew who she was now, or at least they knew enough to stop pretending they didn't. At 0700 sharp, Rachel walked across the range alone. No one called her. No orders had been given. She simply arrived, carrying her satchel, same as before. Same silver jacket, same measured pace. She placed her rifle on the table, checked the scope, and nodded toward the control tower. Instructor Hayes watched from the overlook, arms crossed. Next to him stood Morrison. "I thought she'd be gone by now," the colonel murmured. "She's not finished," Hayes said. In the bleachers, the trainees sat silent. Today's drill wasn't listed on the schedule. No one dared ask what it was. They just watched as Rachel loaded 5 rounds into her rifle, looked downrange, and raised her head slightly. She didn't say anything, but the signal was clear. She fired the first round. The target at 900 meters jolted. Second shot, direct hit. Third, wind shift adjusted. Fourth, center mass. Fifth, dead center. Each shot struck with exact rhythm, like a memory being repeated. Then she stepped back and waited. Hayes picked up the mic, his voice low, clipped by the speakers. "Same drill. One at a time. Line up." The soldiers moved quickly, but not out of fear. They weren't performing for her. They were following her. In the field, discipline had to be learned. Sometimes through failure. Sometimes through loss. But sometimes it arrived in the form of a witness. For the rest of that morning, Rachel stood behind each trainee as they took their shot. She didn't correct their posture. She didn't offer advice. She simply watched. Occasionally she nodded. Sometimes when the shot veered off, she would tap once on the stock of the rifle, not as a reprimand but as a reminder. Be still, breathe, remember. Jenkins shot third. His hands shook slightly. When he missed by a margin, he cursed under his breath. Rachel stepped beside him and handed him another round. Reset. He looked at her, uncertain. Just fire. He did. This time it hit center left. Close enough for confirmation. She nodded once and moved on. No praise. No blame. Only clarity. By noon, every soldier had taken a turn. Not a word was said after the last shot. Rachel packed up her gear and walked off the line. They watched her go, not because they were told to, but because she had earned that silence. That afternoon, at the edge of the admin building, Morrison called a meeting of the leadership staff. No agenda, just a closed-door session. They gathered around a long table. The air was thick with a different kind of tension. Respect mixed with unease. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, "you've all seen the reports. You've read the file." A few nodded. "She shouldn't exist," one major said. "That operation, everything surrounding it, was blacker than night." "Exactly," Morrison replied. "And yet she's here." Someone else asked, "What's she planning to do now?" Morrison looked at the table. "She's not looking for command, not promotion. She doesn't want to be reinstated." "Then why stay?" Morrison leaned forward. "Because she wants these men to remember where they come from." There was silence. Then the base commander, General Harrow, cleared his throat. "Her presence raises questions. Chain of custody. Unauthorized access." "She was authorized once," Morrison said. "And she's done more for these kids in 3 days than any instructor has in 3 months. A colonel leaned back in his chair. "This isn't about protocol anymore, is it?" "No," Morrison said. "It's about legacy." They voted without raising hands. Consensus. Widow Mark would remain. Not as an instructor. Not as a guest. But as a presence. An unnamed role that didn't exist on paper, but one no one dared revoke. Meanwhile, outside in the late heat, Rachel stood near the old firing bunkers. She ran a hand along the concrete, traced the edge of a bullet scar in the wall. Some wounds stay visible. Some don't. She turned slowly and faced the range again. Not as a shooter now. As a reminder. That silence could carry weight. That recognition didn't have to be loud. Later that evening, the new recruits were dismissed early. Lewis stayed behind, standing near the firing line. He watched the light shift over the sand, the way the wind moved in low spirals. Then he stepped up to the line and pulled a small notepad from his pocket. He scribbled a few words and pinned it to the edge of the shooting station with a piece of spent brass. "You don't laugh at ghosts. Especially not the ones who came back for us." By the second week, something quiet had changed across Fort Carlisle. Recruits who once slouched now stood straighter. Conversations at chow were shorter, more focused. Range drills ran smoother, as if some unseen thread now connected every motion, breath, aim, trigger, reset. They called it the widow effect. Not in mockery. Not anymore. It was whispered with a kind of reverence usually reserved for names etched on granite. Not because Rachel demanded respect, but because she gave none of the usual cues and yet commanded all of it. She still wore the same silver jacket. Still carried the same scuffed satchel. She came early, left late. Never signed reports. Never lectured. But always watched. And that was enough. One afternoon, a storm rolled in from the west, sweeping across the open fields with a low, slow growl. Lightning cracked miles away, and the sky hung low with that bruised yellow tint that made soldiers tense without knowing why. Training was paused. Shelter protocols kicked in. But Rachel stayed outside. She stood at the edge of the range, her jacket zipped to the neck, her boots dug into the clay. No rifle today. Just her, arms folded, watching the target sway in the wind. Hayes found her 20 minutes later, holding a poncho in one hand. "You're going to get hit out here." She shook her head. "I've been in worse storms." "You waiting for something?" Rachel's eyes stayed on the field. "I'm remembering." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Hayes stood beside her in silence, watching the wind scatter dust and dry grass across the lanes. "Tomorrow's the ceremony," he said after a long pause. "You sure you want to attend?" "I'll stand in the back." "They're naming it after you, Rachel." "Officially. There'll be cameras." "Command." "Morrison's invited a senator." She didn't flinch. "I'm not here for applause." Hayes nodded. He handed her the poncho anyway. She took it without thanks, without hesitation. The next morning, the range was spotless. Flags had been raised. The bleachers cleaned. The staging area raked flat. No brass casings in the dirt. No footprints across the line. Everything sharp. Still, the plaque had been replaced with one forged in iron, set into a granite pillar. Widowmark Range. In honor of sacrifice without witness. Valor without name. Rows of chairs were lined in front of the range gates. Soldiers filed in slowly, some in dress uniform, others in combat fatigues, depending on rank and assignment. There were no speeches scheduled, just one inscription to be unveiled and one rifle demonstration to follow. Rachel didn't sit. She stood beneath a small stand of trees, hands behind her back. Morrison approached her as the ceremony began. "You don't have to stay hidden," he said. "I'm not hiding." "I mean," he hesitated. "You deserve more." Rachel looked at the formation of soldiers beyond him. Her voice was steady. "Let them have it." He nodded once and walked to the podium. No microphone. Just his voice. "This is not a dedication for a name. It's a reminder." Morrison glanced down, then back up. "Most of you don't know what it means to disappear. To choose silence over recognition. To walk away from medals, command, and remembrance because the work wasn't done for show." He gestured toward the range. "She didn't do it to be remembered. But we remember anyway." At that moment, a single private stepped forward, Lewis. He walked to the podium and spoke just one line, a quote scrawled by hand from the edge of his own training notebook. "You don't laugh at ghosts. Especially not the ones who came back for us." The recruits stood in silence. Then, unexpectedly, a ripple passed through the crowd. They straightened, boots together, hands behind their backs. Not at command. On instinct. They were standing for her. Rachel didn't step forward. She simply lowered her head, and for the first time, her eyes closed. Morrison watched her. He didn't salute. He didn't call her name. He just said, quietly enough that only the closest officers heard, "She's back." After the ceremony, a new protocol was added to the training logs. Every new class at Fort Carlisle, regardless of unit, would begin their first day at Widowmark Range. Not with weapons drawn, but with silence. A standing formation. 5 minutes. No phones. No talking. Just the wind and the dirt and the weight of memory. They called it ghost drill. It wasn't mandatory. It just happened. And with it came a new kind of strength. One not measured in rank or medals, but in discipline. In focus. In the acknowledgement of debt. Because every soldier there knew, somewhere between the dry soil and the stillness of the wind, Rachel had left something behind. And that presence stayed. Back in the armory, weeks later, a young soldier unpacked the morning's training inventory. He paused when he opened the side drawer. Inside was a folded note, sealed with oil paper. He looked around. No one else was there. He opened it carefully. "To the one who watches after I'm gone. Don't seek recognition. Don't ask for praise. Just remember that when silence arrives, your steadiness matters more than you think. R. The soldier folded it again, tucked it into his vest, and walked out toward the range. Outside, the wind was rising, and the line was already forming. I didn't come back for medals. I didn't come back to be saluted or quoted or remembered in ceremony. I came because somewhere, across the dust and the wire and the long shadows of war, I left a part of myself behind. I left it in the silence. The kind that doesn't echo. The kind that lingers. They called me Widow Mark because I buried names no one else could. Because when the call came, I didn't wait for approval. I just went. Sometimes that meant saving a life. Sometimes it meant no one knew I'd been there at all. But I never did it to be seen. I did it because someone had to. Now I walk the line again, older, quieter. My boots still fit, though the ground feels heavier than before. The rifle is the same. So is the distance. But what's changed is them. The kids with too much confidence and not enough memory. The ones who thought strength came with noise. With laughter. With being seen. Now they know better. Now they carry something else. Not fear. Not guilt. Just awareness. And that matters more than any medal. I watch them from the shade where ghosts belong. Where names don't need repeating. I see them pause before they fire. Adjust their stance. Measure wind not just with instruments but with instinct. They've stopped looking for praise. They've started looking for purpose. That's all I ever wanted. That's why I came back. Because in a world that honors noise, the quiet ones carry the weight. We hold the line when no one's watching. We speak when no one else will. We leave when the work is done. So if you ever see someone standing alone at the edge of a crowd, silent and still, don't dismiss them. Be kind. Because they might be carrying more than you'll ever know. They might be the reason you're still here.